Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Today, we will be discussing a very interesting topic. We're going to be discussing the reasons behind the mitzvahs. Okay? We're going to get into some of the reasons behind the different commands in the Torah. Now, one might ask, how are we going to discuss the reasons behind the commands? The rabbis tell us that the reasons behind the mitzvahs have not been revealed yet. It's a famous idea based on Kabbalah that the ta'ameh mitzvot, the deep reasons behind what we do, have not yet been revealed because right now our existence is limited. The mind even that we have today is limited. But when Mashiach will come, God will, so to speak, open up our minds and introduce us to a whole new level of perception. And then we will truly understand the depth and the divine wisdom within the mitzvahs and really why and how they all had to be the way they are and work the way they work. So you're going to ask me, how am I going to tell you the deeper reasons behind the mitzvahs if they're not going to be revealed till Mashiach comes? I have a very simple answer for you. That's where creativity comes in. So even though we say in general that the real, clear, deep understanding of the mitzvahs have not yet been revealed, but still God has mercy on us and God throws us some understanding at least, especially through the wisdom of Kabbalah, which of course, although it's being more and more talked about in the later generations, it was in fact revealed in the very beginning to Adam Arishon and to some of the select righteous of the generations. Avraham is actually accredited to writing one of the oldest books of Kabbalah. And even in the times when the official books that we have from the rabbis, the Mishnah and Gemara, were written, we are taught that those rabbis also knew Kabbalah. It was just kept to the select leaders of the generations, and so it wasn't widely spread to the. But today, it's the rabbis explain that as we come closer to the coming of Mashiach, it's more that wisdom is more accessible to us, and it's also more permissible to teach to everybody. Just to explain, one of the reasons given why it was kept so hidden in the earlier generations and why today there isn't such a restriction. Many say that it's not restricted at all. Some put a partial restriction on how much Kabbalah should be accessible to the average person. But the basic idea is like this. Originally, when man sinned, so in addition to the world becoming affected, we say that the world went down in its level of purity and sanctity, also man himself was affected. Before the sin, the concept of evil and confusion was external to man. After the sin, it became part of him, part of his makeup. And so to the world became a mixture of good and evil. But what we're not really all so aware of is even the Torah itself became mixed of good and evil when man sinned. And so once that happened, so according to the Arizal, the forces of negativity, the forces of evil that exist, had more power to attach themselves and affect the Torah. At the early stages of the Jewish people, it was almost crucial to the continued existence of the Jewish people and of the Torah, the way it needed to be developed, to limit the amount of secrets, because if we would have taught the secrets of Torah then, the forces of evil were so strong that they would have been able to get a lot of power from it as well. So it was kept secret. Only the absolute pure and holy were able to learn it. And it was restored in that way. And from generation to generation, it was maintained so that it wouldn't get lost. And then around the 1500s, when all the work that the Jewish people had done from the beginning of the Jewish people until the 1500s, all that collective progress in weakening the forces of evil So at that point in time, it was decided by God that now Kabbalah can be revealed in a much bigger, grander way. And that's when the Zohar was found. And another 100 or so years after that, Arizal comes in the mid-1500s and begins to teach Kabbalah publicly. The immediate reaction when Arizal began to teach Kabbalah publicly was one of the great rabbis of his time, probably one of the lador, a much older rabbi than the Arizal. The Arizal himself was a young rabbi. He died at 36. So at this point he was, even younger than 35 years old. Imagine a 35-year-old rabbi doing something that was unheard of in the Jewish world. Teaching Kabbalah publicly, he became famous for being a mystic and teaching his teachings, new novel understandings of the Zohar and the deepest secrets that the world hadn't heard of from the beginning of time. So the Gadol of the time sent a message to the Arizal. Simple message. I guess when you're a wise man and a Jewish leader and everybody listens to you, you just need a few words. Simply said to him, we don't teach Kabbalah publicly. And that was, he gave him an instruction to stop. But the Arizal did not stop. But what happened? So he summoned the Arizal to come to him, because you don't go against authority. We don't have the right to do what we want. We have the right to have our opinions, but we also always have to, at the end of the day, check, especially when it's nogea to all of the Jewish people, and we're trying to, innovate a new thing. We have to make sure with the people that know better than us and that have more experience that it's correct what we're doing. So he summoned the Arizal to come to him to give him. He was going to rebuke him and say, "You can't do that." But before the Arizal had a chance to go to him, so he had a dream. This rabbi had a dream. And in the dream, they told him that the Arizal has permission to do what he's doing from heaven. And so he sent another message to the Arizal saying, you can continue doing what you're doing, go in strength and be successful, because you have been chosen for, I'm paraphrasing, of course, for this mission. And he understood, he was told from heaven that it's time to change. And, it's a very important idea that we're talking about. How do we, the individual Jewish person, we have good ideas, we want to help and fix the world. We want to make ourselves better, the people around us better. How do we know when it's time to innovate, and how do we know our innovations are correct? Very important thing to think about, and that's always going to be a challenge. And we see controversy in the world out there when the innovations are accepted or not accepted, and ultimately, we have to go to our leaders. The leaders, those that God entrusted the Jewish people into their hands, they have been given the responsibility and the foresight and the knowledge, those experts in all of the Torah that came before them. They have the clarity of wisdom, the spiritual stature to try to be innovative, because when they're being innovative, it's not from a position of ignorance, and it's not to uproot the sages that came before them. It's incorporating everything that we have experienced and learned until now, and realizing which direction to go now with the haskama of the sages that came before them. And only someone with a breath of wisdom that is beyond our comprehension. You have to know everything that has come before us. Then you're ready to fully and truly understand when you can innovate and how to innovate. And that's why
sources are trustworthy sources to learn these ideas.
We have our sources. Our sources are the rabbis that have the haskama of their contemporaries in every generation. We don't have
There are certain Hasidic groups that put out Kabbalistic knowledge on their websites and stuff like that.
So today, we'll get to today and what's ideal today.
Yeah, today, you know what's happening today? You got non-Jewish people studying Kabbalah. What do you make of that? What does it mean?
Unfortunately, misguided people will do extremely misguided things with the little knowledge that they have when they think that they're in charge and that they're the boss and that they know better than the sages. That's what I think.
But why is it happening?
I blame it on him. No, not you. The guy sitting behind you. Obviously, there's a level of confusion in the world that has actually even been placed here by God. The evil inclination that resides within, confusion, temptation, fear. There's a lot of reasons why we end up making these kind of mistakes. That's why it's so important, so crucial that when we go for direction, we go to the right leaders. Who are the right leaders? Those that have lived by example. When a person all of his life does not veer from the path of King David or the path of Moshe Rabbeinu or the path of Avraham, and their whole life is a testimony to the truth of the Torah, both written and oral, and they are expert in all of the writings that came before them, the Gemara, the Mishnah, the Rishonim, the later rabbis, the books of Kabbalah. When they know all of that, and they live a proper, stable life, and they lead by example, then you can then you have the right to trust such a person. The rabbis say, who should you go to learn Torah from? Someone who appears to you like an angel, someone who is so holy and so exalted that he appears to you as an angel.
You want to mention a name?
In today's day and age, I'll go even if they recently passed away, because we had the merit to live in their times. You have Rav El Yashiv, you have the Steipler Gaon, you have Rav Yosef, the Ben Ish Chai, the Lubavitch Rebbe.
You had Rabbi Weinbach.
Rabbi Weinbach, the great Rosh Hashiva here. We had very close connection to him. We were able to speak to him personally and get guidance. And these are people that walk the walk. Just picturing the faces of these rabbis instills fear of heaven in you and love for Hashem. That's, it says we will see our teachers and they will be a light for us. Just picturing them tells you about what they were all about. As a matter of fact, the rabbis explain, I believe Rabbi Nachman speaks about it at length, hearing about, learning about, and getting to know our sages, it increases our faith in God. The verse says that one should cling to God. But the rabbis ask, how can one cling to Hashem? Another verse says that God is a consuming fire. Who wants to cling to a consuming fire? They get consumed in the fire. So the answer given is we should cling to the sages, cling to the rabbis, because they are very close to Hashem and they perceive divine wisdom in its most pristine state. And when we cling to them, then we are following and clinging to Hashem. The beautiful verse that teaches us this is, it says that Avatem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokechem chayim kulchem hayom. And you that are clinging, attached to God, to Hashem your God, are all alive today. So, on a simple level, that verse was told to everyone. You that are attached to God are alive. And the very basic message we take from that is, as long as we attach to God by doing His mitzvahs and following His Torah, we're alive, because the only way to be alive is to be connected to the source of life. That's why the rabbis say that Kihem Chayenu v'Orechemenu, also on a pasuk, the Torah is life and the length of our days. But there's another way to understand that verse in a little bit of a deeper sense, is to split it into two separate statements, which, by way of expounding the verses of Torah, we have the authority and the right to do, and it could be understood like this: Ve'atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokechem, and you that are attached to the Lord your God, who are you? That's the tzaddikim. Those are the absolute righteous that are truly attached to God without wavering, without inconsistency. By virtue of them that are attached to Hashem, chayim kulchem hayom. Now, talking to the congregation, now you all are alive today, because you have to be connected to them as well. By being connected to the sages, we are connected also to Hashem, and I don't mean by way of intermediaries, that we don't believe in. We're all one entity. The Jewish people are all one spiritual entity, and we're all one. But just like the head is a more important, a more alive organ than the arm, so too the tzaddikim are closer and higher and more alive than those that are lower in the body. And this is all ideas that we accept. We have Gemaras that talk about it. We have spiritual teachings, Chassidut, Kabbalah. It all says the same thing. And the Arizal himself says that in every generation there's a rabbi that is like spiritually in the place of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's the leading rabbi of that generation. Who he is, we don't always know. As a matter of fact, we don't usually know specifically, because no one makes an announcement. Here's walking around with a sign, I'm the Moshe Rabbeinu. Usually when a guy walks around with a sign like that, we give him a special jacket. You know which kind I mean? Yeah. The white one that goes like this, that's what we give him. There's a bunch of Moshe Rabbeinus and Mashiachs. We can go take a trip and visit them. We don't always know who the head rabbi is, but we're taught by the Arizal that in a true and deep sense, there's someone that spiritually represents that connection, that leadership. Just as Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to God and and stood between the people and God, the Pasuk says it itself, so too we have today rabbis like that. We don't have to, pull names from a hat. We can just look around. Who are the ones that fit the role? We can trust that they're the ones to go to. In this idea that the Arizal teaches, he says specifically, and he gives us a beautiful comparison, visual, that we can understand to what extent we should take this. He gives the idea of a tree trunk with all of its branches and leaves. And he explains that this particular tzaddik, that's on the level of Moshe spiritually, is like the tree trunk. And all of the branches that are a part of that tree trunk and extend outward are the rabbis, all of the other true, authentic rabbis of that generation. We'll continue with this beautiful visual. I'm seeing this beautiful tree with the branches extending. Now, this part is not mentioned in the Kitvei Arizal. What I would like to maybe add, is that in this visual analogy, the leaves can be us. And it's all one thing. We're all attached somehow, and it becomes one entity. Through the trunk and the branches and the leaves, it's all one entity, and that's the Jewish people. And that's the pasuk we just quoted. Those of you that are attached to God, the righteous, through you, we are all living and attached to the living God. So that's the idea. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of sipurei tzadikim, which it means the stories of the righteous. When God wrote the Torah, he's the first person that actually wrote stories of the righteous. If you want to write a book, Stories of the Righteous, who's the first author that we must give credit to? It's God himself. God could have wrote an information book, a dictionary, an encyclopedia, but he didn't write an encyclopedia. God wrote a beautiful Torah, a beautiful book that's part of it is stories, part of it are instructions, but it's all divine communication. And the experience of learning Torah is life-changing. It's I don't even have words to explain. And God in his infinite wisdom understood how to put in those 5 books everything and anything we could ever need and want, ever. There's a statement from the rabbis in the Zohar. It says like this. Zohar, by the way, is one of the main books of Kabbalah, written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Should we start singing? Bahar Yochai, very famous song. Lag BaOmer, we all go and sing and dance and are joyous at the site where he was buried. So someone, coming from far might say, what is this? You go and celebrate by the grave of a righteous person. But that's exactly the point that we've been trying to make today. When a person's life is a testimony to truth, then where do you go? You go to where he rests, because that is the testimony. You're standing in front of a person that gave his life day in, day out for truth. When a person lives for truth, just as truth doesn't die, neither does the person. So the tzaddik lives on in a spiritual sense. And we go, that's why we go there.
Goes to Meron, must be 500,000 people every year.
Yeah, like over.
Exactly. I'm just
Not tzaddik, but over here.
trying to help us appreciate, why do we go? Why do we 500,000 people go to a place where some man that lived 2,500 years ago was buried?
Lots of food.
But before the food, they started, remember, they came first, and then we needed to bring them food.
Right.
Why do they go?
All food.
They go because that man lived for emes, lived for truth. And he received teachings from the highest place one can imagine. And so we go there to show our belief and our support for the truth. He lives on, and we live on, and we stay connected. If we're not connected to our ancestors, then we're floating. You ever saw a nice, one of those astronauts? When an astronaut goes out into space, which is dark, and I would say this is like this world can become very dark. It's like where you can get lost in this world, just like you get lost in outer space. If you don't have that cord attaching you, then you're gone. You're floating. Us too, if we don't have that cord attaching us to something, we're floating in this world. We have to be attached. Again, like the tree trunk we're talking about. We have to be attached, rooted in the ground. Anyhow, we were talking about stories of the righteous. We see that God himself took great pleasure, and he wrote the stories of the righteous at great length. And that's exactly where we find the first idea, where we're taught that we must also continue to write the stories and talk the stories of the righteous. Because, again, each generation has to learn and look at its contemporary righteous people to learn from and to follow and to draw inspiration from. There's a mitzvah to be Panei, to be Kabel Panei Rabo, to go and see the face of your Rebbe. Again, in Kabbalah it's taught that by seeing the physical face of your Rebbe can help your understanding become complete.
Is that what's behind the tish?
Of course, coming to any attachment, any involvement we can have with the truly righteous and the true scholars of Israel is got deep ideas to it. It's not just all like, let's have a party. Let's have a party. We'll have some kugel and some herring. That's not what Judaism is all about. So if we all gather behind to come see a holy man, it's because we want to get that spiritual strengthening from that person. And that's real. It says it in the Gemara. The Chazal say, being Mekarel Pnei Rabo, you have a mitzvah to go and see your teacher. And then on that, the mystics explain that the deeper meaning behind that mitzvah is by seeing the face of your Rebbe, it will help you gain full understanding of your teaching. So there's spiritual things happening as well. There's the spiritual aspect of the connection. Hearing about the great stories of the unwavering, Mesirut Nefesh, the self-sacrifice, and the stubbornness of the great tzaddikim, the righteous in each generation, standing up against the enemies, those that wanted to persecute, wanted to eradicate this great religion, this great people. That gives you, it inspires you. You, on the one hand, you're crying because of the terrible things that happen, but when you identify with the courage and the undying will within, you're inspired at the same time. It's an unbelievable, almost experience with the stories of the Holocaust. On the one hand, you're broken inside by hearing about what tragedies and travesties were done, but on the other hand, when you hear how a little girl of 6 years old stood up like a giant, you're inspired. One story that sticks out, I just actually had the merit of reading it not too long ago, from Rebbetzin Youngreis. Unbelievable. I heard of her as a popular figure, a Jewish woman, a leader. Of course, she didn't become a rabbi. Remember, let's keep that in mind. So she writes, at the age of 6 years old, she learned a valuable lesson. She lived in Hungary at the time where Germany was taken over, and Jews were being sent to slave camps, where she writes that they were dying there. They were working them to death, and they were dying. And after that, of course, came the gas chambers and the concentration camps. And her father was a big rabbi in the town, and her mother was a very righteous woman. They were given over to helping their fellows in any way they could. So she writes, at 6 years old, she learned that one cannot stand idly by when his brother is in jeopardy, when his brother's life is in jeopardy. It's a pasuk, al ta'amod al dam re'echa. You cannot stand on the blood of your fellow. Mm-hmm. At 6, she learned this lesson. How did she learn it? So they were taking all of these young Jewish men that were of age to serve in the army, and they were putting them in slave labor camps, and they were working them to death. They weren't coming back alive. They were dying. So her father realized that how can you save these Jewish boys? If they caught a sickness that was contagious and dangerous, so that they didn't want them around the soldiers because they didn't want the soldiers to die and get sick and die. So then they sent them home, or they sent them somewhere. They were spared of this, march of death, so to speak. So they found a way that they could almost concoct they found out that putting injecting raw milk into the body and taking like bean powder and making it into some kind of a makeup, and putting it on the eyes, made them look like they had a particular disease that was highly contagious and highly dangerous. So if they could do that to each of these boys, then they would be sent away and their life would be spared. The question was, how do we get these boys this milk and the injection thing and what they need? So the rabbi had access to the people that were serving in these slave camps, but they checked him on the way in and out. He could not bring in anything to help them. So I have a great idea and no way to get it to them. So how did they get it to them? Her mother thought of the idea to sew it into the jacket of her little daughter, 6 years old, because they wouldn't think to check her. And that's what they did. They sewed in the things needed into her jacket. They went in to visit, and they were able to give them the things they needed to save who knows how many lives. But what do we see? we see that her mother and father were willing to risk her life, and she was willing to risk her life as well. Why? Because she writes there that your brother's worth it. You have to. That's what she says. Anyway, so this is a story that really hits hard, and there are many, many stories like that. You have all of the books of the righteous from generation to generation standing up against the Romans, the Greeks, the Nazis, and even today we have to stand up against our enemy. And sometimes in today's world, who we have to stand up against is actually very, very ironic, because who do we have to stand up against sometimes in today more than an enemy that's waiting for us on the other side of a wall, more than an enemy that's attacking us with a gun or a knife. We have to stand up against ourselves. A person can grow up in a free society like America and become afraid to stand up for being a Jew and living the life of a Jew because he's a little bit embarrassed, because it's not convenient, because it doesn't fit into his schedule. And let's imagine some of the schedules that people come up with. Some parents come up with a very busy schedule for their child. From when he's born until when he's 1 year old, we have to start showing him visual cards to prepare his mind for the tutor that's coming when he's 2 years old, because we don't want to wait. We want to get him into the proper, college one day. Then they send him to they enroll him already at birth or pre-birth to the right preschool, then the right, elementary school, and so on and so on. And by the time he's done, his calendar's booked until he's 32 years old. He can't do nothing until he's 32. He's got no time to take a month off to go to Israel, no time to do anything. He goes through his whole life too busy to think, how did I get here and who put me here and why am I here? Instead, it's all about whether it's attaining intellectual satisfaction or monetary satisfaction. It's all about the Benjamins. All that's what he's after. That's what his life becomes all about. And you know what? It's almost tragic. Think about it. It's tragic because he wasn't even given a chance, because if you would stop him and say, hey, stop, listen, someone put you here. How'd you get here? Why are you here? He might say, you're right. These are good questions. You have some answers. But he's too busy to think. And even when sometimes they start to think, you don't want to, when you've gone in a direction for half your life, you don't want to stop and start over. Nobody wants to start over. They're afraid to start over, or they're embarrassed. What will my friends say about me if I start to be different or look different? The enemy today is not the person standing at you saying, I'm going to kill you because you're a Jew. It's the freedom that we have to do and be anything except being a Jew. That's today's enemy. And for that as well, we get inspiration from the righteous, from the Jewish leaders that come. And it's not always a famous person. It could even be a simple person. And we have to all the time look for this type of inspiration, because without inspiration, we're going to die. And I guess it seems like that's what we came here to talk about today. How to stay inspired in this dark, confusing world. How to make sure we don't get lost. So we have to have our eyes on the goal, and we have to have our eyes on those that know the right goal and have their eyes on the goal. And we have to be good followers. I'll conclude with this interesting idea, my take on what a Jewish leader is. So, in the secular world, they'll tell you there are leaders and there are followers. You got to be a leader or a follower. That's not really true. Or not when it comes to following Hashem anyway. When it comes to following truth, then we're all followers. We're all here to follow. So who are the leaders? The ones that are following the best. The ones that are following, that are in front, they become our leaders. And we become the leaders for those behind us. So a Jewish leader is just a good follower, someone who knows how to see the goal, how to get closer to Hashem, and he just races forward without getting detracted or distracted. That's a Jewish leader. That's why we follow those that we follow.